I know you have dedicated pretty much the years after the election to voter access, making sure everyone has the right to vote. But what do you see is the biggest challenge facing Georgia voters right now?
We know that in Georgia, we have some of the best rules in theory, but the challenge is making the reality match the theory. Georgia allows voting by mail, which has already started. You can request your ballot right now. We have 20 plus days of in-person early voting starting on October 12th, including a mandatory Saturday. And we have, of course, Election Day. But unfortunately, what we saw in June was a meltdown of the systems, a blaming of poll workers that were under-resourced and under-trained, a deployment of new machines that didn't have adequate support, either in terms of their physical infrastructure or technicians to fix problems. And we had polling places that shut down because we didn't have an adequate number of poll workers. These are problems that we now know are going to be in play, and we need to be solving them. And Fair Fight has been working hard to encourage people to sign up to be poll workers. If you want to join, please go to powerthepolls.org. But we also want people to make a plan to vote. If we want voting to be easier this cycle, if we want election day to be the right process, and if we want election season, which is really what we have here in Georgia, to go smoothly, the best weapon that we have is making a plan to vote. So plan to vote by mail if you can, and most people can, so we want you to. But we know there are those who have disabilities, who have language barriers, who are displaced, or who simply don't want to do it. Make sure you plan to vote early in person, know where the locations are, and then make a plan. If that doesn't work, have a backup plan to your backup plan so you can show up in person on Election Day.
And I know you touched on it, the poll workers. It was an issue in June, kind of got blamed on COVID and not being able to train them in time, especially with a lot of older ones leaving because of the risk. Now places in Georgia are adding more locations, adding more early voting places. Of course, takes more poll workers to do that, but we're not necessarily getting those poll workers to sign up. So how do we combat that problem? What can be done? What needs to be done?
Well, I look at the fact that unfortunately for our primary, it was rescheduled twice, and yet the adequate planning and investment wasn't done. But I think across the board, regardless of your party, regardless of your region of the state, everyone saw the meltdown. Almost everyone was affected in some way. And so I do believe we're taking the necessary steps. One of the simplest ways to solve for a shortage of poll workers, should that occur, is to vote by mail. Voting by mail means you're not standing in line. It means you know exactly where your ballot is, because Georgia is one of the states that allows for ballot tracking. If you go to vote.org, you can actually register to vote online today, but you can also register for your absentee ballot. We actually created a separate website for you. If you want to go to peachvote.com, you can sign up for your absentee ballot. We want everyone to use the tools at their disposal. And yes, we are going to face a challenge with poll workers because the average age of poll workers is in the mid-60s. And in the state of Georgia, that means, like a lot of places where COVID continues to be a threat, it means it's going to be hard to have the usual folks come back. But that's why we're encouraging people to sign up to be poll workers. Go to powerthepolls.org, sign up to be a poll worker. It's a paying gig. So if you want to make a little extra money, this is a way you can help yourself and help your community and make sure that everyone has the right to vote.
And we were talking about those long lines back in June. Unfortunately, we saw a lot of them in minority communities. I just watched your documentary. Awesome. It was wonderful. But I came from a civil rights family. My dad and my grandfather both marched Selma to Montgomery. So I grew up knowing the issues and the fight to just be able to vote. Do you see some of those historical disparities that faced minority communities when going to the poll? Do you see any of those still happening today, and how are you working to change that, if so?
They do exist. And part of the reason I produced All In, the Fight for Democracy, is that we need to understand that it may take different forms, but voter suppression has been around since the beginning of this country. And it has three pieces. Can you register and stay on the rolls? Can you cast your ballot? And does your ballot get counted? what preceded the Voting Rights Act was a very violent approach to imposing those three impediments to the right to vote. But what we have found in the 21st century is that those same attacks on our right to vote look like administrative rules. They look like bureaucratic barriers. They look like user error. But what we need to understand is that often it's not you, it is them, it is the system. And we have to hold the Secretary of State accountable because we elected him to run a system that works for all Georgians. And that's why in the wake of the 2018 election, Fair Fight got to work, both suing to improve the system, but also working on legislation and advocacy. And we've seen some remarkable changes, but it's still not enough. And that's why we want voters to make a plan, because voter suppression is still out there. We may have good opportunities, but having an opportunity doesn't mean it's going to come to a reality. And that's why on National Voter Registration Day, we want to encourage people to take advantage of registering to vote. That's the point of entry. That's the magic key. And in Georgia, you have to be registered by October 5th in order to participate in our elections. But the other reality is that unfortunately in Georgia, lots of folks are registered whose names mysteriously disappear from the rolls. So it's not enough to be registered. Double check and make sure you're still on the rolls. Unfortunately, the combination of incompetence and malfeasance that unfortunately disproportionately affects Black and brown voters in Georgia is still at work. And so we need folks to take the responsibility of checking for yourself. Don't assume that because it was done, that it remains done. But once you check for yourself, encourage your friends and family to check their registration, and then encourage everyone you know to make a plan to vote.
Is there anything that can be done? Say you did register October 4th, find out you somehow got purged in that time before the election. Is there anything that can be done?
So purging is I'm only going to do this because I think it's important that we know the terms. So purging is when the Secretary of State's office intentionally removes names from the rolls. But what's happening with a lot of folks is that they're database errors, they're processing errors, and you don't know about it in time. And so if you dial 866-OUR-VOTE, 866-OUR-VOTE, you can actually get some information. So if you find yourself hitting up a problem about how to vote or whether you have the right to vote, please call. Do not think it's your fault. Because one of the most effective ways that voter suppression works is it convinces everyone that if I had been smarter, if I had done more. That's not your job. Your job is to register. Your job is to show up and vote. It's the job of the people we've elected, like the Secretary of State, to be in charge of a system that works. And it's his job to make sure that our poll workers, our county elections officials have the resources and the training they need to do their jobs. But the buck stops at the top. And so let us know if you have any problems with 866-OUR-VOTE.
Perfect. And then one of my last questions, and then I know you guys want to talk about the census just a little bit, but I think it's really important for younger voters. This election, I've heard people just be like, well, I'm not excited to vote. I don't like the candidates. What would you say to that unenthused voter?
I don't think you have to be enthusiastic about the person. You have to be enthusiastic about the possibility. And the possibility is that we can have leadership that actually believes in criminal justice reform and believes that we should have access to healthcare, believes we should fix the challenges and the problems in our environment, believes that women deserve to have choices and autonomy over their body. Whatever your issue is, if there's someone whose policies meet your needs, then be excited about the possibility and the policies. You don't have to be excited about the person. In America, we don't elect saviors. We elect people to go to work for us. And you don't have to be excited about everyone you work with or for. You just need them to do the job. And that's what voting is about.
Absolutely. And just real quick before we wrap up, I know you started Fair Count after Fair Fight. How do they work together? What is the importance of both of them, especially now in 2020?
So Fair Fight is about making sure that you have the right to vote, but Fair Count is about having the resources to make that vote matter. And that means having the millions of dollars that Georgia deserves to meet the challenges we have. We know that one of the reasons Georgia didn't get as much in PPE as we needed was that Georgia had an undercount in the census in 2010. They didn't know we were all here and that we needed as much as we needed. And because Black people are the most likely to be undercounted in Georgia, we were also the most likely not to get the resources we needed. But this harms all of us, regardless of race, regardless of region. If there is an undercount in Georgia, we stand to lose billions of dollars from our economy and from the money that the state gets from the federal government. And if you want to put that in context, just this year, they cut almost $1 billion from education in the budget. If that becomes permanent, that means there are kids who are going to lose out on education every year for the next 10 years. There are kids wanting to go to college who won't get Pell Grants. And there will be billions of dollars spent on COVID recovery. And if they undercount the folks in Georgia, our money's going somewhere else. And that means we won't get the help we need, the recovery we need. And the last one I'll point out is that we have seen natural disasters hit Georgia time and again. The money for natural disasters comes from the count in the census. And so if we don't get counted in 2020, if there's a hurricane in 2021, if there's a tornado in 2022, when they get ready to decide how much money Georgia gets, we won't get enough because they don't think there are as many of us here as there are. And for people of color in particular, if we get undercounted, if we get erased, then we lose political power as well. And that is a danger for the next decade. It takes 10 minutes to change the next 10 years of your life. They already know, if you have a cell phone or utility bill, they already know who you are. Fill out the census and get your money.
Such a pleasure. Anything else you'd like to add? I mean,
Well, I will add, to fill out the census, go to my2020census.org or go to 844-330-2020. You can fill it out over the phone. All you have to do is 10 minutes of your day and it's done for the next 10 years.